Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you guys have not eaten too much food and in food coma or too much art and arted out. But the next hour, I have the pleasure of being on stage with three incredible individuals whose practices have demonstrated the critical importance of, quote unquote, staying with the trouble. And I have Clara Pay to thank, who's the curator of the talks program for C-Focus, for giving us this prompt this afternoon to discuss such an incredible writer and thinker. And I wanted to begin by paraphrasing a little bit of Donna Haraway for those who may not be familiar with her and her thinking. And I quote, "In urgent times, many of us are tempted to address trouble in terms of making an imagined future safe, of stopping something from happening that looms in the future, of clearing away the present and the past in order to make futures for coming generations. Staying with the trouble does not require such a relationship to times called the future. In fact, staying with the trouble requires learning to be truly present, not as a vanishing pivot between awful or endemic pasts and apocalyptic or salvific futures, but as mortal critters entwined in myriad unfinished configurations of places, times, matters, meanings." And the next sentence is one that has actually stayed with my own personal practice, which I'm happy to know now that also Clara, I think, thinks about this. Also, another quote, "It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories." So riffing off this incredible thinker who has actually, I think, influenced not only artists, but cultural critics, dare I say, anthropologists, sociologists, and many people who are crafting a better relationship with the non-human world. We have three people with me on stage today whose own practices across visual art, literature, and activism are very incredible individuals who demonstrate the power of culture today as spaces to trust and to walk and to embrace, but also really being bold and courageous in understanding that some contexts and some phenomena are deserving of interrogation and propagation within the cultural sphere. So in that vein, I would like to ask each character with me today to think about a significant challenge that each have faced in their own practice that has knocked them flat, and that this particular moment caused great struggle for them to confront, but they found a particular way to stay with the trouble, and most importantly, to reflect on how that particular troubling challenge was important for them to do so in their practice. So I wanted to start with Arahmaiani. So that they will each have 10 minutes, and then we'll come back to reflect upon what they've shared with us today. So we'll begin with Arahmaiani.
Okay, so thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's only 10 minutes, so I have to go fast. Because yes, staying with the trouble is not something easy, right? So I want to show you some example of the work that I have been doing to be able to stay with the trouble. All right? Okay. I begin since I was young, trying to deal with the trouble. Even when I was still in art school in Bandung, in Indonesia, and I was imprisoned, arrested, imprisoned by the military regime, and even kicked out from the art school. And then that was 1983, and 1994, I got death threat from hardliners Islamists. Again, I have to escape. Of course, every time I got in trouble, I have to escape abroad. So I've been living since then nomadically for more than 40 years because, yeah, I have to survive. Anyway, I want to show you example of the artwork to emphasize how we need to understand what is happening and to find the so-called creative solution. Because if we just follow the political kind of strategy system, you know what happened. You are imprisoned, maybe being killed, or then you become a hero. But do I really want to become a hero? That's my first question. Actually, until I was pondering on my experience, finally I said, no, I just want to contribute something positive to life. Okay? Okay, this is example of my artwork that is considered problematic. It's called etalase. That's where I got the death threat from hardliners Islamists. But now it's already collected at National Gallery Singapore. Okay, and the other one is Lingayoni. Also, it was considered problematic, considered blasphemous by the hardliners Islamists. They say you are doing something blasphemous. It's halal for us to drink your blood. Oh my God, I'm also a Muslim and my father was a religious leader. He never taught me drinking blood is halal. Anyway, that's what happened. I had then to escape again from my country. Anyway, this is related to my critique on global capitalism system. And then how the colonialization, in this case neo-colonialization operating, and the impact is that people forget or do not appreciate their own cultural heritage. So this Lingayoni is actually a symbol of like yin-yang in China, balance between two oppositional power in nature. And where if people have this deep understanding, they can have, yeah, attitude of a wise person. It's very important, I think. Okay, yeah, this is one of my performance, symbolized then when I was like challenging this power, and then I mentioned already, oh, yeah, they're gonna kill me, I become the hero. Is that what I want? No. I want to contribute something positive. So, since that time on, okay, this is also critical kind of artwork installation called Nation for Sale, and performance with the traditional outfit, Balinese outfit, to fight against neo-colonialization. But after I realized that if I just do this kind of strategy, it's just for myself. So, since I have that awareness, I developed the so-called community-based kind of art project since 2005 and ongoing until today, and it's already going all over the world. Because a lot of communities in the world today, especially also young generation, worried about what will happen to our future, especially with the environmental destruction. So this work is, besides doing a performance art or showing a flag project installation, we are also doing something concrete, like managing the trash, recycle, managing the source of water, planting trees, reviving organic farming system for the food sovereignty system, and then also implementing this new system of alternative energy system, like solar panel or also from water. I've been working with many communities all over the world, actually, not only in Indonesia. For example, in Singapore, I've been working with also University, National University Singapore, Singapore University of Social Science, Nanyang Technology University, LaSalle, and now the students also regularly coming to Yogyakarta, where I'm based, to work with the young people from Indonesia. So they want to save their future. And that's really, really the best way, I guess, when we are doing something really concrete, yeah, to save our future. Oh, sorry, just want to show you. This is, for example, in Bali. The one before was in Yogyakarta. And this performance was performed by various community, not only artists, but also activists, but then also from boarding school, Islamic boarding school, but not only Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Catholic, even atheists from Germany, because I've been teaching in Passau University in German. It's not an art school, it's Department of Southeast Asia, Faculty of Philosophy. And the students also coming to Southeast Asia to work with the young people from this region. Okay, but okay, now I'm just showing you the work I have been doing in Southeast Asia, because the focus is Southeast Asia. This is in Patani, so for this example, I've been working with the Muslim minority in Thailand since 2005 and still ongoing until today. Yeah. So actually, just so for your information, this year I'm going to join the team of artists from Thailand to the Venice Biennale. So the curator, Apinan Posyananda, when I asked, why you invite me? I'm Indonesian, I'm not Thai. No, you are Thai, Ani. Okay, why not? Yeah, so this project is an ongoing kind of project. And this one is the one in Tibet Plateau. I've been working also in Tibet Plateau to save Asia Water Tower, because it's the source of water in Asia continent that about 2 billion Asians living from the water coming off from there. But with the climate change situation, it's under threat of drying up. So I've been working with the community there, especially supported by the monks since 2010, and still ongoing until today. And the Chinese government, after 5 years we are working, okay, we approve and support the project until today, which is really successful for us. Anyway, another important thing in Tibet, what I find out is that the heritage culture from Nusantara, from Southeast Asia, is still being preserved, even practiced in the monastery, especially the Gelugpa sect or the Yellow Hat led by Dalai Lama. So I was so lucky I have a chance to relearn about this forgotten cultural heritage. I don't know if any of you have been to Borobudur Temple, the biggest Buddhist temple in the world. Is in Central Java, and is connected to one of the biggest monastery before, from 6th to 12th century in Sumatra, in Muara Jambi. Okay, so that's the reason I'm so excited about implementing again the tradition of our ancestor in reality, in today's situation, which is very relevant. For example, there's this principle, the so-called Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, means unity in diversity. That's what we need today, right? Why do we have to fight with each other? Why do we have to kill each other? That's crazy. Let's not be divided. Let's get together and protect our future. That's it. Thank you.
Wow, Yanni, that's got to be the first time I've been on stage with you and you kept to 10 minutes. Because this lady has so much to share. And if there's anything I take away from what you just shared with us, is that to stay with the trouble made change come to be. And that's very much demonstrated in the projects that you've realized in Tibet, which has been an ongoing platform for quite some time. And it's only because of your ongoing presence and role in that community that you then achieved what you wanted, which was government support. So that's one takeaway to glean from that particular project. But on to Kristian. I have to say that it's a pleasure to meet you. I don't know enough about your practice, so looking forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Admittedly, I think when I first saw Zoe's prompt, I was a little stumped. And I'm one of those like melodramatic writers that has to like moan and groan as part of my process. So I'm very grateful to the people in my life who, you know, on the daily have to deal with my whining, my partner and my best friend. Also grateful to my partner for giving me the idea for how to respond to the prompt. As you mentioned, I am a writer. I also dabble in activism, and what I've prepared, I think, definitely is directly related to these experiences and to my practices, but I think it might be broader. So we'll see how it goes. But I've written it so that it's under 10 minutes. So in 2019, I co-wrote and staged a play about race in Singapore called Brown is Haram. And last year in 2025, I was asked to revisit that play, to update it for a world that's shifted in many ways, but that has also in many other ways stayed the same. For as long as I can remember, I've prayed for things in my life to stay the same. I've wanted loved ones to stay with me just a little longer. When I was 13, my best friend's brother passed away. And then when I was 17, a close friend of mine died. Again, when I was 21, I found out that one of my theater students had passed. And then in my 30th year, which was just under 2 years ago, I experienced another 4 deaths of acquaintances and friends, including one of my best friends of at least half of my life. Self-contentment is also quite fleeting for me. In 2015, I was diagnosed with body dysmorphia, and then 10 years later, an anxiety disorder. And so nothing really seems to stay long enough. You know, the sense of belonging in this country as a non-Chinese person, the feeling that things will be fine in Gaza, the love and agency I have over my body and my mind, the life of a dear friend. I have found myself in the past year hopelessly and violently grasping for something to hold on to. Something that I could wrap my hands around, something that had weight, something that would allow me to remind myself that gravity exists. And if gravity exists, then it means that I can put my feet on the ground, and if I can put my feet on the ground, it means that I'm still here. Updating Brown is Haram, re-exploring race, felt like that thing to hold on to. I was eager and anxious to make this work, to return to this mode of writing, thinking, and feeling that I knew how to do, to return to a topic that is so bound up in who I am as a person. I've been trying with much desperation to try and resuscitate this interest, that spark, like some kind of critical emergency, but I have just had no success. Alexis Shotwell, writer of one of my favorite books, Against Purity, which was also introduced to me by my partner, says that there is no such thing as standing outside our situatedness. Instead, we must start from an understanding of our implication in this compromised world, that we are compromised, and from that understanding still act that it were not so. I have become compromised, broken, something else entirely because of the grief that I've been experiencing. But what Alexis Shotwell and Donna Haraway in her book, Staying with the Trouble, teaches us is that there is beauty and also a skill involved in living with the ruins. And there will always be ruins, from the institutional to the relational to the internal. Staying with the trouble means, amongst other things, staying with the grief, my grief. And so this should not be a critical emergency that I try to firefight. Instead, it is necessary for me, for us, to let it wash over, to let it transform, transcend, and change so that it changes us. Haraway rejects the term emergencies because to them it connotes something approaching apocalypse. Instead, they offer urgencies, because urgencies have other temporalities, and these times are ours. These times are for us to think, for us to stand our ground, and for us to receive. Yes, it is an urgency that I write this play, but it is also an urgency that I grieve. My favorite writer, Hanif Abdul-Rakib, believes that an artist can never be done with an idea. And I believe this. I believe that I will never be done with discussing race, even if it might feel like that to me right now. And similarly, I will never be done with grief. I also believe that an idea can never really be done with an artist. Likewise, grief will never be done with me. To push through, to ignore, to distract would be a form of abstraction. But abstracting grief is an impossible task. One cannot stay outside of the trouble. One cannot stay outside of the grief. Abstraction, divorcing something from its materiality, that's pretty easy and convenient, and I think that's how we have the world that we live in today. But something easy and convenient is not work. We must work our hearts. We must not abstract. Especially as artists, as activists, as writers, people who are bearers of myths, histories, stories, cultures, of wonder, of bewilderment, of love, we must not let our hearts atrophy. The act of remembering, an act that is so completely entwined with grieving, is an act of staying with the trouble. It is also an act of loving. It's an act of the heart. It's an act that says, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here to love you, to love who you were, to love you and who you are in my memories, to love all the people who made you, you. Your mom, your baby sister, our friends, me. I have been trying my utmost to get back to some untarnished version of myself that has never actually existed. But in the past few weeks, as I've been reminded of the love that the people around me have, I've been trying to love the many selves that I am, to stay here with them. Ultimately, my many selves will mean that the updated version of my play will be many plays. A play undoubtedly about race, but also a play about relationships, about grief, about my friend. I think grieving opens us up to who we were in the past and also what we want to be in the future, how we want to live, how we want to love. It opens us up to understanding that the world is cruel and will continue to be cruel, but still we must attempt to create a world where love can exist for everyone. And so I guess what I'm saying is this. Staying with the trouble means staying with love and in love. Staying in love with an imperfect, compromised but beautiful world. Staying in love with an imperfect, compromised but beautiful self. And staying in love with an imperfect, compromised but profoundly beautiful memory of my dear friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristian. That was really beautiful. And as an audience inside an art fair, and I'm sitting on stage and looking at a constant crowd just moving past and looking in, you might ask yourselves, why is it so important that the emotion that's just been shared is an inherent part of art? And if there's anything that I struggle when I enter these art fairs is the reliance on the visual and the tangibility of owning art. But art is much more than that. Art is actually performative, it's literature, and it's fundamentally anchored in a particular social context. And those social contexts are never uniform. And yet our art market likes to present art in these lovely white boxes out there that would make all of us think that those white boxes give an equation of equivalence. But they are not. So I thank you, Kristian, for making that really, really evident, that what we've just heard is actually the barrel gun of why artists need to be artists if they want to stay with the trouble. Because the echoing of trusting we must compromise, that we love the imperfections, and that we have to try to hope that change is possible, even as those who want to push culture in that vein, and I am a big believer in that. But now on to the lovely Shubigi. A little bit of a personal little note about Shubigi. I have to say that her pulp series books are quite inspirational for me as a writer and curator myself. I often find myself at night leafing through the pages of this book because it's like entering a little exhibition in bed, but it is so beautifully written. And it's not only about the work itself, but as a writer, I really aspire to Shubigi as a linguist, because I do think you have that ability. So over to you.
Gosh, thank you. No pressure. Thank you so much. And thank you, both of you, for what you've shared. I actually grew up near the border with Tibet in the 70s, and the most formative experience in my life was actually watching, oh, sorry, one moment, timer, because I have a tendency to overrun. I actually remember Tibetan refugees coming with only two things, their children and their manuscripts. And they made this really hard journey over the Himalaya into India. And I realized, of course, as a child, I didn't realize it, but I realized as I grew older and I watched the Library of Sarajevo burn on TV, it was the first televised siege in modern warfare and the longest siege in modern warfare, barring Gaza, where I started putting the pieces together about how culture and language are invariably under fire. So I'm so glad you actually highlighted your work in Tibet, because that's so vitally overlooked as a region very often. Tourism has always been a way to, I think, bury a lot of issues and oppression. Thank you for what you just did, Kristian. It just pierced through, like you said, Zoe, this whole spectacle that we are always subject to, I think, sometimes, against our will also. So I was thinking, okay, let me respond to this prompt. I thought, okay, what can I say? I could talk about the Kochi Biennale. That knocked me flat. If you heard about it, it was a perpetually postponed 5th edition, postponed only thrice, and massive institutional failures, mafia, also death threats, all the joys of all of that. But I won't talk about that because it's only 10 minutes. I could also talk about how after I released the first pulp book, a Singaporean, a very important person in the Singaporean literary scene attacked me in public about it. He hadn't read the book, but told me, amongst other things, you are aware that people with actual PhDs have written about this? And he picks up the book and flings it on the floor. He says, what makes you think you have the right to write this book? It was a very devastating experience because I hadn't expected that level of vitriol. And as it turned out, he had mistaken me for someone else. But I also am really glad that I got the vitriol and not whoever that poor other person was. But it shook me so much that when the time came around to write the second volume, which was just a year later, I actually took a lot of his pseudo-arguments and used it as a way to address one of the problems of silencing, and that is gatekeeping. So while I was knocked flat and very devastated because I'm a little conflict averse and I didn't expect that level of, he was very vitriolic. I luckily don't remember a lot of it. But I took all of that nonsense and that trauma and actually poured it into the second book. And that's the book that actually went on to a lot of people. I mean, it has less scholarship, but apparently a stronger emotional heft, because that's the one that people respond to more. But actually, I don't want to talk about that either, having done so. What I really want to talk about is something I haven't had the chance to ever speak about before. And you talk about being knocked flat. I was making my second feature film in Armenia. It was going to be shown at the Rockpond Art Museum in Shanghai in 2023, I think. And I was basically making a film about the unseen cultural labor of women in preserving a culture that has experienced not one but two genocides, one of which is ongoing, by the way. And I was there on the border, working there, when Azerbaijan invaded. And I'm not going to call it a war, because a war implies that they are two, like we don't call what's happening in Gaza a war, right? It involved, because it assumes that there are two combatants or two armies. There was no army to speak of really on Armenia's side. So just really briefly, what's been happening is Azerbaijan has been taking more and more land from Armenia. There are more Armenian diaspora living outside of the country than in it. And as a country, it's going to disappear. It's now just a tiny sliver. There are parts of the land parts of the country, where the land is now just a sliver where you can see one border when you stand at the other end of the country. You can actually see the border, it's that narrow now. And between Turkey and Azerbaijan, they're going to just pinch it off and then take that other parcel, the south, and so on. Anyway, so Azerbaijan attacks in September of 2020. Sorry, this is 2022. Not I was there in 2022, and the reason they attacked in September was because Russia had invaded Ukraine, and there were sanctions against Russian oil and gas. September is the eve of winter. Europe needed the oil and gas for its winter, and where do they get it from? Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan is effectively ruled by an oil family. It's really just a country whose whole export is oil. They also basically rebranding Russian oil and piping it into, and natural gas and piping it into Europe. So the undercurrent of this whole conflict was actually oil, again, or rather the absence of it, because Armenia has no oil. And one of the most heartbreaking things I heard while I was there during the war was someone telling me we only have rocks and dust. And Armenia is one of the most fertile lands. Some of the best fruit in the world come from there. But that disparagement of one's own land from a traumatized person, a person traumatized by war, and the ongoing genocide in Artsakh, where over 100,000 people so far have been killed, even more displaced. Again, no one's really talking about this. It took 2 whole days for the media to even cover this. And I remember being there and feeling an actual disassociation from myself. I was just thinking, what the fuck am I doing here as an artist? What's the point of anything I do? All of this is so damn meaningless because this is what's happening and you feel like you're really screaming in the void. I just remember, like you spoke about grief, I just remember feeling so shaken up all the time that I was there because it was wrong that I was there. It was wrong that I was filming. Every time I stopped, people would tell me, no, capture this, capture this. I was in all these states of how would I say, unhelpful states of being. Everything in me, whether it was my training as an artist, completely unhelpful. My ideas as a young child growing up, watching refugees trying to save just children and their language and culture, unhelpful in that moment. None of what I had gave me the equipment or the tools to be in any way helpful to anyone near me. Anyway, so I'm going to cut a long story short because I'm very aware I only have 4 minutes left. I make this film despite everything, and because the people I work with, I don't work with a crew, I work alone. I form a very close relationship with every participant, and they have complete ownership over their appearance. They control the film, they direct the film. Anyway, the film gets made, we bring it into China, it gets banned. And I just said, okay, enough. You know, this is one thing I'm going to fight for. As it turned out, and I just want to mention this, when sometimes it seems like the whole state, the whole apparatus of the state is something you can't take on, the Rock Pun Art Museum did something so kick-ass, so awesome. They just, they didn't fight the ban, because there's no point doing that. Instead, what they did was, they just put a label on the door, because it was 4 floors of the museum, this whole show, and the film was on 1 floor. So they just put a label on the door that said education room. And they pretended it was a private screening. And every time anyone came to check, they just said, yes, these are invited visitors. We are doing a program right now. It's a closed door screening. It's not open to the public. And people were requested to not post any images of the film on social media. And I have to say, considering this was Shanghai Art Week, and it was also the Singapore Biennale, Shanghai Biennale, sorry, excuse me, and 2 art fairs one at the same time. So we had throngs of visitors. Nobody posted on social media. Everyone respected it. And I thought that was just incredible, the nature of that kind of trust that we had in people to not out us for showing this film. And it ran for like, I think 6 months. After that, I was really also happy that the film went to the Sharjah Biennale, because these were all countries that are, by the way, complicit in what's happening in Armenia. The UAE, as you know, is also funding conflict, as you know, right? So, and China is one of the allies of Armenia. And like Armenians say, we have the worst taste in friends, because the allies are Iran, North Korea, and China. And so anyway, so that's just what I wanted to share. When I say knock me flat, it's not me, it's watching. I think the hardest thing I've ever faced, and I've faced many things, the hardest thing ever is realizing how utterly futile so much of the work one does can be. So while the film has traveled, people have heard those stories, and it's achieved nothing concrete on the ground. So it's still knocking me flat. I don't think I'd be able to reconcile my complete ineptitude with dealing with the waves of horror that overwhelm us on a daily basis. But I think that all said and done, what you've spoken about, this persistence, it's because that's all we know. And I think it's also important to realize that it's a form of narcissism to assume that as a single person, you can affect such massive change. I do believe, however, that every time I get a chance to speak, I should give voice to the people who probably aren't here at this moment. And that's the very least I could do. I'll stop now. I'm also thinking, yes, it's one, and there goes the timer. Thank you so much.
I hate putting time on speech, actually. I would much rather be sitting around a table and having a cup of coffee and just letting this conversation roll. But thank you, Shubigi. I think that the tussle between making a work of art and then its display are two totally different systems, but they suffer the same malady in there's a certain level of fear in those structures of access and display. And I think that it is, dare I say, this question of visibility that is a little thread that rocks all three of you, and the so-called challenges you have described in that, Arahmaiani, you have consistently challenged the religious assumptions and the genderized assumptions of faith, and then taken that through to your activist work with community to demonstrate your own agency as a single individual to fight the odds, despite the great mountain of people who were trying to tell you you should not be doing what you're doing. And then, Kristian, I can hear that there's this very innate relation to race that continues to speak back to you. And that is now entering a very personal sphere of grief. But I think that those two alliances of grief being made visible actually is what we need more in society. We need to acknowledge and be vulnerable in open collective spirit more in order for those wounds of so many vast immigrant stories to be laid plain and be embraced. And Shubigi, I know that you have traveled the world in identifying where memory is being destroyed, where its archives are being displaced or censored or redacted, and that the struggle of being a filmmaker and a visual artist and a writer to find the spaces where you can have your audiences come into the space that you have often brought across the sea to another location. So I'm about to pose another question to these guys, but in the meantime, do, as audience, think about questions you might have, because I'll then turn it over to you guys in case you have questions for these lovely folk. But I was also just another prompt that's been given as a consequence of SEA focus in staying with the trouble, and Donna Haraway's thinking is often modeled on what she calls redefining kinship, in understanding that kinship is not just a human-to-human understanding, but we are innately a being, a species that we extract resource. Every single day, I don't think we really spend much time thinking about where the resources that are enabling our movement, our thinking, our communication, our bodies is actually an extraction. So, I know that all of you have variably dealt with questions of resource and access to resource. So I was wondering if you had any particular comments that you would like to make about how these particular challenges that you just described have changed your relationship to water, for example, Arahmaiani, because you've been very much a fighter for water justice. And so I'm wondering, in your own practice as an artist, how does that affect your everyday?
Okay. Well, of course, when you become aware about this problem and think about how can we deal with it, right? Then we have to explore this creativity to find possibilities for the solutions. And yes, okay, as a person, of course we can do something for ourselves. But when we're talking about nature, if we understand that everything is connected one to another, so we have to also understand this kind of reality, yeah? And then we have to come together.
So I guess education might be your everyday moment where you're aware that you need to pass on your attitudes and your values.
Of course, this is one important thing is, have this kind of program to educate, especially younger generation.
Because your work is very, if you haven't yet seen, Arahmaiani's work is in sea focus. But this wonderful lady is a very multidisciplinary maker. There isn't a single form of media that you focus. It's much more the glue of the social world. So
Yes, that's right. Oh yeah, by the way, besides an artist and activist, actually I'm also a writer. So the interdisciplinary approach is my practice. Although at the beginning maybe sounds like confusing for some people, but when we are doing something concrete, then everybody's like, oh yes, that's what we need to do if we want to save our future and the coming generation.
Sorry, was the question, how has our relationship with extraction evolved? Was that?
yes, and
Okay.
if there's a moment if it changed something in your everyday habits.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I don't think it has just yet, but I'm hoping that this year is the year that happens. I mean, I've been as I've been thinking a lot about grief and thinking then a lot about the idea of finding wonder outside of one's self and trying to figure out what is that thing that, can bring wonder and joy into my life. And I do think kind of like thinking about the relationship I have with the world and thinking about how that can be, I think kind of like entwined with the world is a way in which I hope that I can, I think kind of almost find this thing, this wondrous thing, like sublimation almost, I guess, that sort of exists outside of myself. And I think becoming maybe a little more okay with the fact that in everything I do, in every action I take, I am indeed extracting something because that is the system in which we live in. And I guess as Alexis Shotwell, the person I quoted, said that there is no such thing as purity politics, right? We are all tainted, and even though that is messed up in many ways, it is also beautiful because that allows us to recognize just how we are connected with each other, how our bodies, share fluids, the bacteria in our bodies are all made up of different things. And so I guess I'm trying to figure out how I can stay with that discomfort that I can't, as Shubigi, you were saying, that I can't make change on my own, but then recognizing that there are still things that I can rediscover with this discomfort, and hopefully that will eventually transcend and become, like I said, this wonder that hopefully can exist outside of me.
Thank you. I love what they both said again. I think that, yes, you're absolutely right. There's a constant sense of being complicit, and I'm going to go beyond compromise and say complicit, in almost all the structures and systems that we are fighting against, writing about, making art about, performing against, and so on. And being complicit doesn't mean that you now must be apathetic. I think that gap is actually what we need to talk about, because there's a massive amount of pressure on us to slide into apathy and unthinkingness If you can keep thinking about and have a level of awareness of what it is you're doing, the change begins then. And the change that you're talking about, like I would add, I actually think the people who need education are older people. May I just say, as a 50-year-old, I'm going to say this right now, my generation really dropped the freaking ball. I don't know why we didn't enter politics. All the assholes entered politics. We don't fight against anything. We're busy lecturing young people who are way more aware about everything because they've recognized the relationship between cause and effect. That this form of extraction is the result of so many systems of inequity, of resource extraction and exploitation, and also oppression that began from empire and continues today. You mentioned neocolonialism. It's an ongoing thing. So I just saw a review, for instance, of a biennale that says, why are people still talking about colonization? Because its effects are still being felt today. The impoverishment of countries in West and East Africa in particular, the constant toppling of regimes in South America, well, look what's happening again. And so this is a constant conversation, and all we can do in generations is pass on the baton of making sure the conversation stays in the public realm. And so I think when we talk about exploitation and extractivism, I would add that know that we are complicit, but don't let that destroy your ability to mobilize, to form community, and work as in groups to change things. I want to just really quickly mention one example. So you know the term tree hugger. It's a derogatory term, but you know where it comes from? It comes from a group of Indian women from a tribe called the Bishnoi tribe. The Bishnoi tribe are really very well known, and we even learn about them in school in India because of their love of animals. Wild animals frequently are in the village and they're taken care of. When they're injured, they instinctively go to the women of the tribe for healing. We're talking wild animals. And when the forests were threatened, the women bound themselves to the trees. They were killed for this, just by the way. So the term tree hugger is a very typical propaganda effort which the state does, the state in collusion with moneyed interests, is to take genuine, powerful community solidarity and turn it into either pejorative term. We're seeing it with the word woke now, for instance. So when you hear the word tree hugger, I want you to remember these women, and please look up the archival photographs of them. It's so incredibly powerful. It's just these village women, unlettered, okay, had no teaching in Marxist theory or any of this shit. They just knew that the forest was inseparable from self. Thank you. Get very passionate.
I love the passion, and that says to me a brilliant artist. I get worried when there's no emotion in the artists on stage, to be honest. But does anyone in the audience have questions for these incredible thinkers? We have one question down here, in the front.
Two short questions. One is that in each of your work in different ways, because you are trying to say things that are difficult to say, there seems to be a dimension of being on the run. So how do you think of that, and sometimes different groups of people that you rely on, places that you rely on, how do you navigate that is the first question. And then in all three of your work, there is dimensions of words, visuality, performance, and maybe each of those do different things. And so how do you rely on those things as well? Can words slip in places where performance can't? Performance, does it bring you closer to people in a certain way? Does visuality, does the image do something else altogether? Yeah.
Can I just quickly go for it, and then I'll hand over? Really quickly, the way I form kinship with people that I've never met before, because all the people I work with are complete strangers. It is very important to be nakedly vulnerable, completely uncool, and remember that the pretensions of the art world fall away in an instant. It's just stuff that you shrug off you. So I'm very open about the fact that I'm very open. that I have no filter, and that's just a polite way to put the fact that you have to be in a state of complete trust, and you must accept that you will mess up, that you will get things wrong. And you have to, and the best way to actually counter that is to be in a position of listening. So what I try to do when I go anywhere is I don't go with a script, I don't go with a preconceived notion, I rely on everyone else to shape me and the film. I mentioned already that they direct the films I do, but they also change me in the process. So for instance, I started the project as a pacifist, and I realized when I was working with survivors from the war in Bosnia, that it's such a smug, privileged position to be a pacifist. Because it's easy to preach non-violence when you're not the person being attacked and killed. So I think it's very important to constantly re-educate yourself, especially when you reach my age. No middle-aged smugness here. You have to constantly change. And the only way you can do that is by doing the work where it's not about your teaching or your training. You have to put all of that aside. Be open, be naked, be vulnerable. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Well, totally agree. I mean, yeah, I've been working with various community with various cultural and faith background. So you know how to do it. This is actually a very complicated question, but I will try to answer it shortly. Well, the first thing what I have to do is to open myself, open my mind, and then learn about their culture, their belief system, yeah? Because that's how we can connect. Otherwise, it's not so easy. Because always there's a kind of gap, and then if it is like also being manipulated for the sake of power, and it should ended up with money, it's so difficult. But when we are open and willing to learn about anybody's culture, faith, even if they don't believe in anything, that's what I've been doing also with the atheistic groups. But yeah, after that, we can somehow adjust ourselves and then able to work together. So because of that experience, I learned a lot. So, and then also finally, I was accepted by everybody. Like wherever I go, they always say, "Oh, in Tibet, you are Tibetan." In China, you are Chinese. In India, you are Indian. Okay, why not? Sure. Yeah, but just yeah, open. That's what is important, I think. Yeah. And then after that, we can also explore possibility to find this so-called creative, innovative solutions to the problem. And we don't need to victimize anybody. That's the important point for me. Not only for me, for everyone, right? Okay.
Okay, I'll try and make it quick, and I will just answer the first question. I love trauma bonding because, I mean, I think there is something so wonderful about pouring yourself into someone else and letting that person also do the same thing. I think there is vulnerability is such a beautiful thing, because I do think that allows two people to really just say like, hey, wow, we're really beside each other, and there is nothing else here. All we have is each other, is our feelings for each other, is our sympathy for each other, and I think that feels to me like ultimately what staying with the trouble means. It means sitting with the fact that all you have is this thing, that this person in front of you, and all you have is what you're saying to each other, and that is beautiful. I think staying with the trouble also implies stillness, and I think I am trying to, I'm damn lousy at it, but I'm trying to, yeah, I'm really trying to hold on then to stillness, because I think that is truly quite beautiful.
Thank you. I want to close off by talking a little that doesn't enter the conversation enough, but as artists, they have mediums. Throughout the fair, you've got works on paper, works on canvas, they're using ink, they've got images of coming across as moving, or they're performative, but they're on a wall and activated only at certain points. So artists have certain relationships to materiality. But I think what we can hear from the artists on stage, that the materiality is only made material because of its human content, in terms of its being imbibed with a significant memory that needs activation or archiving or preserving or transforming. And in that, there is a responsibility. I think that there's a need to stay with the trouble when it comes to putting art out into the world. One of the reasons I still remain in the industry is that I'm fundamentally inspired by what it takes to be utterly vulnerable as an artist and put it out on public display. And not only that, but to hold a dollar value and to be really then out in a world where you're going to seek that kind of validation at a cost of not really truly being listened to for what work it took to make. Because the market itself does not pay enough attention to the amount of human angst and struggle it has taken to make that final equitable work. So I say thank you to the three of you for being so passionate. I thank ArtSG for allowing this kind of a conversation, and for Clara for curating the stage. And thank you all also for coming in on a Sunday afternoon. Enjoy the fair.